Okay. Well, hey, I'm Robin Held. Today I'm going to talk about how we can use our knowledge of human perception to optimize user experiences in mixed reality displays. Specifically, I want to focus on the Microsoft HoloLens and similar mixed reality devices that can overlay and embed digital content in your real world. That's as opposed to completely immersive VR displays that completely block out your world. For instance, here we show how you could use the HoloLens to supplement a bland office with a virtual pet, a digital avatar of one of your friends or coworkers, and a virtual display. There are many challenges to pulling off these kinds of scenarios since there's the juxtaposition of the real world right next to your virtual content. So any mistakes you make when you render that virtual content will be immediately obvious. So for the rest of my talk, I'm going to review the hardware and content considerations that go into making a compelling and convincing what we would call holographic experience. And since games are often the most technologically demanding applications on a platform, we'll focus on a game we created for the HoloLens called RoboRaid. So this is a screenshot from RoboRaid. In the game, your goal is to fight off a series of angry alien robots that are invading your room. And a crucial element of the experience enabled by the HoloLens is the illusion that the aliens are actually breaking through your walls in your room. I can show a quick video that we released about it. One thing to note before we watch this video is that it does show real gameplay. There's two different types of shots in it. The third-person shots were captured using a special camera rig attached to HoloLens technology. If you want to get an idea of what the viewer sees within the holographic frame, as we call it, the first-person shots represent that pretty well.
Well, I say it's magical alien technology that we stole from an asteroid.
It really feels like an alien invasion is coming into your house and you're fighting them. You kind of forget that it's not real.
RoboRaid is the world's first mixed reality shooting game where you defend your home from a robot invasion. You're blending the digital world and the physical world in a way that's kind of unprecedented.
We really want to get people excited about the technology, and there's no better way than while having fun. Every single different room creates new challenges, new types of levels for the game.
It is fundamentally aware of your space. It knows where your walls are. When you're shooting the space around you, you're shooting your walls. It's not some pre-canned level. It literally is your room.
You can hear when the wall is crumbling around you. So if you hear like a cracking sound next to you or behind you, you should turn around and check out what's going on.
And the sound that laser makes, every time I hear it, I grin from ear to ear.
All right, so that gives you a good idea of what the game feels like when you're playing it. Now, to make it into a compelling, convincing experience, we had to get several different visual cues and oral cues right and consistent with each other. Otherwise, if any of these displays, they basically add light on top of your environment. So you can still see your real world, but also see the virtual content. And then with the speakers, we do something similar. So you can see the little red kind of knobs on the headband to the side. Those are the speakers that are angled down towards the user's ears. It makes it so we don't have to cover your ears, but we can still deliver loud sound without blocking out the real world sound at the same time. And then another crucial part of this, any device where you're letting the user walk around an environment and still render things properly, is the head tracking. So we have 6 degrees of freedom head tracking. It tracks yaw, pitch, and roll, and XYZ translation. And then we also have spatial mapping technology that combines that 6DoF tracker with our depth maps to create a 3D understanding of your environment. So I'm going to briefly review each of these cues. Most people in this room are very familiar with them already, but we'll just remind ourselves what they are, and then we'll discuss why each one is important in a holographic experience like RoboRaid, and how to get them right, and sometimes what happens if you get them wrong. So we'll start with occlusion. We'll start with a few monocular cues, but occlusion is obviously a very fundamental one. If object A is blocking your view of object B, then you know that object A must be closer to you than object B. And that's an easy thing to get right if you're just trying to render as we call them, holograms in front of the real world. It becomes much trickier if you want to make it look like a hologram is going behind a real world object. So how do we pull that off? Well, I just mentioned that we use our spatial mapping technology to get a 3D scan of your environment. This is a typical mesh of a room with a couch and walls in the back and a coffee table in front. And if we just basically rendered that mesh as a black object in our scenes, then when you have a robot going down, up and down behind, trying to hide behind that coffee table, it actually looks like it's hiding behind the features in your room. Motion parallax is also another key monocular cue to depth. And this one, basically the most important thing to get it right is to have an accurate 6-off head tracker so that when you move your head, we know how to properly update the scene for that point of view. If you don't get that right, then objects will appear at different depths, obviously. So speaking of the 6-off head tracker, though, there are many different aspects to it that you need to get perfectly right. One thing is not having too much noise or tracking jitter in it. As you see here, if you have jitter in your measured 6-off pose, it's manifested as apparent jitter in the holograms, and so it breaks the illusion that that alien portal is actually glued to your wall. Similarly, if you have too much latency between when you get the pose, even if it's completely accurate, if it takes too long to get to the user's actual eyes, then you get this swimmy effect. Again, it breaks apart the experience. And to minimize the latency in the device, one key thing is to render as fast as you can, given your device. And another thing that's important is to have predictive tracking. So it will always take a finite amount of time to estimate a head pose, render the scene, and then send the photons to the eyes. Therefore, any really effective tracking system should incorporate a prediction algorithm so that you can render the scene as it should appear once it's actually made it to the user's eyes. All right, so for binocular cues, I'm just going to group vergence and disparity together. And we'll just review them quickly, and then we'll talk about their importance to these holographic experiences. So vergence, as we know, refers to the angle between the eye's lines of sight as one fixates on an object, like this blue star. And in some cases, it can give you an idea of the absolute distance to an object. Meanwhile, disparity refers to the differences in the retinal projections of a scene due to the eyes being offset from each other. For instance, in this case, the eyes are fixated on the blue star, and then meantime, the green star projects to the right of the blue star in the left eye, and the left of the blue star in the right eye. And the difference between those projected positions on the two eyes is the disparity associated with that object. So a lone disparity can reveal the depth ordering of different objects, but if it's combined with other cues that provide absolute estimates of distance, then you can actually recover metric distance between objects in your scene. And this is one thing that's crucial to get right in a mixed reality device, and I'll describe why. So let's start first with a scene where we have everything set up properly. The key here is correct calibration, so what I want to really zero in on is that we know the user's IPD, or interpupillary distance. So in this case, we have a real wall, we have a hologram of like one of those alien portals we're trying to make look fixed to the wall. If we know the user's IPD, we know where to render the scene in the two eyes displays. And when the person fixates on the wall, they also fixate at the same distance as the hologram, and they appear fixed in space. Now what happens if we get the IPD wrong? So for instance, here's where we're underestimating the user's IPD. Here the vergence angle is actually too big for the hologram, and so there's actually two separate vergence distances for the hologram and for the wall, and you get the impression that the portal is head and the pin of your ear and bounce around before finally making it into your ear canal. Sounds coming from different locations will have different spectral profiles, and we simulate that in our spatial sound implementation. So if you combine those along with the distance effects that we can model based on reflections of sounds, and you can give a user a very convincing impression of where a sound is coming from in their environment. One thing I'll note is that HRTF has been around for decades, and it's always worked pretty well in very confined situations or constrained situations. What's really unlocked the potential for it is adding head tracking to the mix. Once you add head tracking to HRTF, it's like adding head tracking to a display. Like you get motion parallax. There's lots of analogies between the two, but basically, suffice to say, head tracking makes HRTF a much more useful way to convey information all around the user. So we've gone over several visual and oral cues that were crucial to get right in RoboRaid, and as you can imagine, getting those cues right can enable many other types of experiences. So the HoloLens is already being used in several of these applications. Actually, all these are real current applications. There's Case Western has a medical school program using the HoloLens for teaching anatomy. The Tyson Group has a application they're using for measuring stairs for installing wheelchair lifts in homes. And the field is just in its infancy, but it's going to be exciting to see what other experiences are developed in the next few years. Thank you.
All right, we have time for a couple of questions.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Thanks, Robbie. When we have multiple stimuli added into the augmented reality, so sometimes we're interested in which stimulus actually the subject is looking at. Mm-hmm. So is it possible for you guys to work out an eye track compatible HoloLens?
Are you asking about putting eye tracking into HoloLens?
Yes. Because HTC Vive has eye tracker compatible with SMI.
Right. I'm not familiar with any
yet.
like SMI has a really nice
Yes.
post addition to the Vive that has eye tracking in it. I'm not aware of any solutions that have eye tracking for the HoloLens right now, though.
Yeah, but the difference is virtual reality versus augmented reality. So,
Yeah.
We are curious more about.
The constraints on like the size of the sensors and the LEDs and everything make it much more difficult to have an eye tracker in a head-mounted display for
Thanks.
MR. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether you do any sensing of or adjustment for the ambient illumination, and if not, whether the appearance, the lightness and color appearance of the objects changes in annoying ways.
I believe we do have an ambient light sensor. I'm not sure how people have used it yet in experiences, to be honest with you. One thing I didn't touch on at all was the fact that since we're adding light to a scene, we can never render black. You have to render dark things like shadows, you have to do it by way of contrast with brighter things. And so you end up wanting to have brighter, bolder stimuli anyway.
I had a question about that actually, because in one of your images, which I believe was shot through the HoloLens, it looked like you did have black on a very bright wall with no obvious way of getting a contrast illusion. So.
That's due to the way that that was composited. So it's showing you the correct tracking and all the other performance, but other than that, it's being composed in a different way. It's not actually shot through behind a HoloLens. It's just taking the feeds from the HoloLens.
Okay, thank you.
In order to figure out to render the binocular cues correctly, you need to know where the user is fixating at, right? At which depth, and how do you know that?
Need to know where? Sorry, what?
In order to show the binocular cues correctly, you need to know where the subject is fixating at, right? Where the user is looking at which distance, which depth.
So you're saying like the images you present should change based on where the person's fixating?
How much, where they are looking at.
If you get the IPD measurement correctly, our fit system is within a certain tolerance that we're confident we know where your eyes are, so we don't have to change where we're presenting the two images.
Do you also sort of like predict whether the user is looking at like a alien closer to them or like very far away? You don't take that into account.
They're all just rendered the same way. Yeah, you don't need to render them differently for those situations.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
We have time for one more question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So You talked about the head-related transfer function, which differs for each person depending upon the shape of their pinna.
Yes.
So could you explain how you use that?
Yeah, so it's built off technology that Microsoft Research developed, and they created very detailed scans of hundreds of people's heads. And I believe they have some research papers on this where they showed how they could create the different challenges, like how you define an average HRTF. But that was basically the work they did and published, and then we basically piggybacked off that research because they showed that you can cover a wide range of the population using that HRTF that they developed.
All right, let's thank the speaker one more time.